What if I told you that over 40% of rock legends never made it past their 30s, leaving behind a legacy of music and tragedy? From Blind Melon's haunting melodies to Cliff Burton's thunderous bass that reshaped metal. Here are 25 rock and roll legends who tragically died too young. 1. Buddy Holly. In the early days of rock and roll, one young man changed music forever. Charles Hardin Holly, known as Buddy Holly, grew up in Texas, surrounded by different sounds: gospel, country, rhythm, and blues. By his teens, he had created a style of his own. With his band, the Crickets, he helped shape rock music, inspiring future legends like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Holly wasn't just a singer, he was a pioneer. Instead of letting record labels control his music, he wrote his own songs and experimented with new recording techniques like double-tracked vocals. Between 1957 and 1958, Holly released hit after hit. That'll Be the Day, Peggy Sue, Rave On. His songs were catchy, his guitar playing sharp, and his voice unforgettable. But behind the success, there were problems. Money disputes and arguments with his managers led him to leave the Crickets. Wanting full control over his career, he joined the Winter Dance Party Tour, a long, exhausting journey through the freezing Midwest. Tired of endless bus rides in the bitter cold, Holly made a decision. On February 3, 1959, he chartered a small plane to get to his next show faster. Just minutes after takeoff, the plane crashed in an Iowa cornfield. Holly was only 22. Along with him, Ritchie Valens, J.P., the Big Bopper Richardson, and their pilot also lost their lives. The world had lost a legend far too soon. 2. Ritchie Valens. In just a short time, a teenage boy from California left a lasting mark on rock and roll. Richard Stephen Valenzuela, later called Ritchie Valens, grew up in a Mexican-American family where music was everything. He taught himself guitar, mixing Latin music with rock and blues. His talent caught the attention of music producer Bob Keane, who signed him and changed his name to make it more marketable. Just like that, Ritchie Valens was born. His first big song, Come On Let's Go, made people dance. But it was La Bamba that made history. He took a traditional Mexican folk song and turned it into an upbeat rock anthem. No one had ever done that before. At just 17, Valens proved that Latin music had a place in American rock and roll. His future looked bright as he toured with some of the biggest names in music. But the constant travel wore him down. On that tragic February night, Valens won a coin toss for a seat on Buddy Holly's plane. It seemed like good luck. He would avoid another freezing bus ride. Instead, it cost him his life. At only 17, he became the youngest victim of the crash. 3. Jimi Hendrix. One of the greatest guitar players ever, Jimi Hendrix wasn't just a musician. He changed rock music forever. Born in Seattle, Washington, he had a tough childhood, but found comfort in music. He never took lessons, but taught himself to play guitar. He mixed blues, rock, and jazz to create a sound no one had heard before. Before becoming famous, he played backup for artists like Little Richard and the Isley Brothers. But everything changed in 1966 when he moved to London. With his band, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, he became a star. Songs like Purple Haze and Hey Joe showed his wild new style. He used distortion, feedback, and wah-wah pedals to make his guitar sound alive. Then came Woodstock. Hendrix stood in front of thousands and played the Star-Spangled Banner on his electric guitar. It wasn't just music, it was a moment in history, full of power and emotion. But behind the fame, Hendrix struggled. The pressure of the music industry and non-stop touring wore him down. To cope, he started drinking and taking pills. On September 18, 1970, he was found unconscious in a London apartment. A mix of sleeping pills and alcohol ended his life. He was only 27. Like many rock stars before him, he died too soon. But Hendrix was different. He changed the way people played the guitar, inspiring every musician who came after him. 4. Janis Joplin. No one had a voice like Janis Joplin. Raw, powerful, and full of emotion. She wasn't just a singer. She poured her soul into every song. But the world was never kind to her. She grew up in a small Texas town where people made fun of her. she never fit in. The blues gave her an escape, and she sang with deep emotion. She moved to San Francisco, where she found her place in the psychedelic rock scene and became the queen of rock. In 1967, at the Monterey Pop Festival, she shocked the world. Her voice was like nothing anyone had heard before, full of heartbreak, rebellion, and power. With her band, Big Brother and the Holding Company, she became a star. But her voice made her a legend. Fame, however, came with a price. She felt pressure to always be larger than life. Alcohol and substances became her way of coping. Even as she performed to sold-out crowds and made incredible music, she was struggling. She recorded her final album, Pearl, which captured her at her best, but she never got to see it finished. 5. Jim Morrison. More than a singer, Jim Morrison was a wild spirit. He called himself the Lizard King and led the Doors with his deep voice and unpredictable performances. His music felt like a rebellion, a way to break the rules and explore the unknown. Born in Florida, he loved books and adventure. He questioned everything and used music to express his thoughts. Songs like Break On Through and Light My Fire weren't just hits. They were challenges to live freely. Fans adored him, but Morrison seemed to always be running from something. He drank too much, pushed limits, and became trapped in his own legend. His behavior became more reckless. In 1969, at a concert in Miami, he was accused of exposing himself, leading to legal trouble. Overwhelmed, he left for Paris, searching for peace. But peace was never meant for him. 6. Kurt Cobain. Never wanting to be famous, Kurt Cobain sang for the outsiders, the ones who felt lost. But when Nirvana exploded, he became a star, and he hated it. His music spoke to a generation, but the fame felt like a trap. He grew up in Aberdeen, Washington, a gray, lonely place. Music became his escape. When Nirvana released Smells Like Teen Spirit, everything changed. The song made him a legend overnight, but it also made him miserable. He didn't want to be the voice of a generation. He just wanted to play music. Fame brought pressure. Cobain turned to opioids, trying to numb the pain. His marriage to Courtney Love made headlines, and the media followed his every move. By 1994, he was falling apart. A substance overdose in Rome was a warning, but things only got worse. Days later, he left rehab and disappeared. 7. Amy Winehouse. A voice like no one else, Amy Winehouse mixed soul, jazz, and deep emotion in every song. Born in London in 1983, she grew up in a home full of music. Her father sang Frank Sinatra songs around the house, and she learned to love music early. She had a special way of writing songs that felt real and raw. Inspired by singers like Billie Holiday and Sarah Vaughan, she created a sound that was both old and new. At just 16, she got her first record deal. By 20, she released her first album, Frank, which stood out for its honest lyrics and mix of jazz and soul. But everything changed with Back to Black in 2006. The album was filled with pain and heartbreak, and every song told a story of love and loss. Hits like Rehab, You Know I'm No Good, and Tears Dry on Their Own made her one of the biggest stars in the world. She became the first British female artist to win 5 Grammy Awards in one night. But fame came with problems. She struggled with addiction and mental health issues, and the media followed her every move. Her troubled relationship with Blake Fielder Civil only made things worse. Despite trying to get better, her struggles never ended. 8. Brian Jones. The mastermind behind the Rolling Stones' early sound, Brian Jones was born in England in 1942 and loved music from a young age. He quickly learned to play guitar, harmonica, and many other instruments. Passionate about American blues, he wanted to bring it to a wider audience. In 1962, he formed the Rolling Stones and helped shape their raw and rebellious style. His influence was in every song: his slide guitar on Little Red Rooster, the marimba on Under My Thumb, and the sitar on Paint It Black. But as the band got bigger, Brian was left behind. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards took over writing songs, and Brian became more distant. He turned to substances, and his behavior became more unpredictable. In June 1969, the band officially removed him. Just a few weeks later, on July 3rd, he was found at the bottom of his swimming pool. The cause of death was ruled as death by misadventure, but many people believed there was more to the story. The strange details and unclear witness statements led to conspiracy theories that still exist today. Brian Jones was the first member of what became the 27 Club. 9. Otis Redding. One of the greatest voices in soul music, Otis Redding had a deep, powerful voice that could fill a room, yet he could also sing softly enough to make people cry. Born in Georgia in 1941, he started singing in church as a child. Inspired by Sam Cooke and Ray Charles, he dreamed of a music career. His big break came by chance when he drove a band to a recording session and was asked to sing. That moment changed everything. His first hit, These Arms of Mine, was just the start. Songs like I've Been Loving You Too Long, Respect, and Try a Little Tenderness made him famous. By the mid-1960s, Otis was a star. In 1967, he performed at the Monterey Pop Festival, reaching a huge rock audience. He was changing with the times, exploring new sounds. Then he recorded Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay, a slower, more thoughtful song, unlike anything he had done before. It was a new step in his career, but he never got to see its success. On December 10, 1967, his plane crashed into a freezing lake in Wisconsin, taking the lives of him and most of his band. He was only 26. A few weeks later, Dock of the Bay was released and became the first #1 song ever released after an artist's death. 10. Sid Vicious, the wildest figure in punk rock history. Sid Vicious was born John Simon Ritchie in London in the late 1950s. His childhood was rough. He grew up in a broken home, surrounded by trouble. Punk music was his escape. The raw, rebellious sounds of bands like the Ramones and the Stooges shaped him. He had no real musical skill, but his wild energy fit the punk scene perfectly. When the Pistols needed a new bass player in 1977, Sid joined, not for his talent, but for his attitude. On stage, Sid was a symbol of punk, angry, reckless, and chaotic. But his personal life was just as wild. His relationship with Nancy Spungen was full of fights and substance use. When the Pistols broke up after a disastrous U.S. tour, Sid lost control. Then, in October 1978, things turned even darker. Nancy was found dead in their hotel room, stabbed in the stomach. Sid was arrested for her death, but the truth was never clear. Did he do it, or was someone else responsible? Out on bail, his life spiraled further. He was arrested again for assault, and his substance addiction worsened. Then, on February 2nd, 1979, just a day after being released from jail, Sid overdosed on opioid. He was only 21. His name became a symbol of punk self-destruction, fame, rebellion, and tragedy, all wrapped in leather and chains. 11. Duane Allman. Making his guitar sing, Duane Allman was born in the 1940s in Tennessee. He and his brother Greg grew up with music in their blood. Inspired by blues legends like B.B. King and Muddy Waters, Duane found his own voice through his guitar. His slide guitar playing was smooth and soulful, catching the attention of big names in the music world. By the late 1960s, he was one of the top session guitarists, recording with stars like Aretha Franklin and Wilson Pickett. But his true legacy came with the Allman Brothers Band. Duane and Greg's band mixed blues, rock, and jazz into something powerful. Their live shows were famous for long hypnotic jams and dueling guitars, Albums like At Fillmore East showed off Duane's incredible solos, his fingers flying across the strings with ease. Then came Layla. His work with Eric Clapton on Derek and the Dominoes album created one of rock's most unforgettable moments. His slide guitar in Layla sounded like pure heartbreak. But just as his career reached new heights, tragedy struck. On an October afternoon in 1971, Duane was riding his motorcycle in Macon, Georgia. 12. Randy Rhoads. Different from the rest, Randy Rhoads wasn't just about playing fast. He was a true student of music. Born in California in the 1950s, his mother ran a music school, and from a young age, he approached guitar with focus and discipline. In the late 1970s, he helped start Quiet Riot, making a name for himself in Los Angeles. But his big break came in 1979, when Ozzy Osbourne, struggling to rebuild his career, took a chance on him. Randy changed everything. His mix of classical music and heavy metal created a fresh new sound. His solos were fast but full of melody, setting a new standard for metal guitarists. With albums like Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman, he gave the world songs like Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley. Even as he became famous, he never stopped learning. Between shows, he studied classical guitar, always trying to push his skills further. He wasn't just a rock star, he was an artist shaping the future of metal. Then, on March 19, 1982, everything ended. During a tour stop in Florida, Randy got into a small plane for a quick joyride. The pilot, an inexperienced bus driver, tried to fly low over Ozzy's tour bus. He miscalculated. A wing clipped the bus, and the plane crashed instantly. Randy was gone at just 25. 13. Cliff Burton. Changing heavy metal forever, Cliff Burton made bass playing more than just background noise. It was powerful, emotional, and unforgettable. Born in California in 1962, he grew up in a house full of music. He started on piano, but soon found his true passion, the bass guitar. By 13, he was practicing for hours every day, determined to make the bass do things no one had ever heard before. Inspired by classical music, he mixed melody and power in a way that set him apart from everyone else. In 1982, Metallica knew they needed him. His skills made their music deeper, darker, and more complex. With Burton, they created 3 legendary albums: Eamall, Ride the Lightning, and Master of Puppets. His bass solo on Anesthesia, Pulling Teeth, showed that the bass wasn't just there to keep the rhythm, it could tell a story. Songs like For Whom the Bell Tolls and Orion carried his unique style, mixing beauty with heavy metal's raw energy. He didn't just play, he reinvented what metal bass could be. Then tragedy struck. On September 27, 1986, Metallica's tour bus crashed on an icy road in Sweden. Burton had won a bunk bed lottery that night, unknowingly picking the most dangerous spot. The bus flipped, and he was thrown out, trapped under the wreckage. He was only 24. The world of metal was shaken. Metallica was never the same. 14. Shannon Hoon. Some voices carry more than just sound. They hold emotion, pain, and truth. Shannon Hoon had that kind of voice. Born in Indiana in 1967, he grew up loving Led Zeppelin and the Beatles. Music was his dream, and he chased it to Los Angeles, where he co-founded Blind Melon. Their sound was a mix of folk, psychedelia, and grunge, creating something fresh and unique. At the center of it all was Hoon, pouring his soul into every lyric. Blind Melon's first album started quietly. Then No Rain became a hit, launching them into fame overnight. But Hoon struggled with success. The pressure, the spotlight, it all felt overwhelming. He turned to substances, trying to cope. His bandmates worried. He tried to get clean, but addiction kept pulling him back. By 1995, while recording their second album, Soup, his struggles were clear. The music was brilliant, but Hoon was slipping away. 15. Andrew Wood. Seattle's grunge scene was dark and heavy, but Andrew Wood brought something different. Born in Mississippi in 1966, he had a bright, glam rock energy that set him apart. While others stayed in the shadows, he loved the spotlight. With his band Malfunction, he became known for poetic lyrics, a wild stage presence, and a voice that could shift from soft to explosive in an instant. But it was with Mother Love Bone that his legend truly began. The band was on the verge of success. Their sound mixed raw grunge with theatrical rock, making them unique. Their debut album, Apple, was set to launch them to stardom in 1990. Songs like Crown of Thorns and Chloe Dancer showed Wood's gift for turning heartbreak into melody. But addiction followed him. Opioid was always there, even as his dreams seemed within reach. Just days before Apple was released, Wood was found unconscious in his apartment on March 19, 1990. A opioid overdose. He never woke up. At just 24, his future was stolen. His death shook Seattle's music scene. His bandmates and friends were devastated. From their grief, a tribute was born, Temple of the Dog, a project featuring Chris Cornell and the musicians who would later form Pearl Jam. It was their way of saying goodbye. 16. Lane Staley. Haunting and filled with pain, Lane Staley's voice gave Alice in Chains its dark, powerful edge. Born in the late 1960s, he grew up surrounded by rock and metal, inspired by the legends before him. When grunge exploded in the early 1990s, his voice became one of its most unforgettable sounds. Songs like Man in the Box, Rooster, and Wood were filled with raw emotion. But behind the music, addiction was slowly consuming him. As Alice in Chains became more successful, Staley's struggles grew worse. By the mid-1990s, opioid had taken its toll. He grew thin and weak, withdrawing from the world. The band released their self-titled album in 1995, but touring was impossible. Then came their MTV Unplugged performance in 1996, a stunning yet heartbreaking moment. His voice was still strong, but his body told a different story. That same year, he lost his fiancée, Demry Parrott. The loss shattered him. He isolated himself, barely seeing anyone. His final known recording, Died, was a sorrowful farewell. On April 19, 2002, Staley was found dead in his apartment. 17. Hillel Slovak. More than just a guitarist, Hillel Slovak was the heart of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Born in another country but raised in California, he built a strong friendship with Anthony Kiedis, Flea, and Jack Irons. His guitar style mixed funk, punk, and psychedelic rock, inspired by Jimi Hendrix and Parliament Funkadelic. Every note he played was full of energy, shaping the band's early sound in albums like Freaky Styley and the uplift Mofo Party Plan. But while his music was full of life, his personal struggles told a different story. As the band became more famous, Slovak's substance addiction grew worse. He left for a short time, but came back, hoping to start fresh. However, opioids still had control over him. While the band moved forward, he struggled more and more. Some people can manage their problems, but Slovak was slowly consumed by his addiction. His energy faded, and even his music carried signs of his pain. On June 25, 1988, Slovak was found dead in his apartment from an opioid overdose. 18. Eddie Cochran. Pure rock and roll energy, Eddie Cochran was born in the late 1930s. He started with country and blues, but found his true passion in rockabilly. He wasn't just another musician. He was a pioneer. He played with sound, experimenting with recordings, and pushing the limits of rock music. His song Summertime Blues captured teenage frustration like no other, while hits like Come On Everybody and 20 Flight Rock were full of unstoppable energy. Just as he was reaching new heights, tragedy struck. Cochran wasn't just famous in the U.S., he was a sensation in the UK. Across the ocean, young British musicians idolized him, including future legends like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. In early 1960, he went on tour in England, wowing crowds at every show. He was at his best, ready to take his music even further. But in one terrible moment, it all ended. On April 17, 1960, disaster hit. Cochran was in a taxi with Gene Vincent and his fiancée when the car lost control and crashed. He was thrown from the vehicle and suffered fatal injuries. He was only 21 years old. His death left a huge hole in rock and roll, a talent lost too soon. But his impact never faded. 19. Mark Bolan. More than just a musician, Mark Bolan was a star who made glam rock shine. With his wild hair, glittery clothes, and electric energy, he turned every concert into an unforgettable show. But behind all the sparkle, he was a true artist who wrote songs full of life and imagination. Born Mark Feld in London in the late 1940s, Bolan grew up loving rock and roll legends like Eddie Cochran and Chuck Berry. His first band, Tyrannosaurus Rex, played folk music with strange and dreamy lyrics. But when the group became T-Rex, everything changed. The music got louder, the guitars screamed, and Bolan became the face of a new era. With songs like Bang a Gong Get It On and 20th Century Boy, he inspired stars like David Bowie and Queen. By the early 1970s, T-Rextasy took over. Fans screamed, concerts sold out, and Bolan was on top of the world. But as the years passed, glam rock started to fade, and so did his success. Still, he didn't give up. He tried new styles and even connected with the rising punk movement. A comeback seemed close. Then, tragedy struck. In September 1977, just weeks before his 30th birthday, Bolan died in a car crash. He had always been afraid of driving, believing cars were dangerous. Sadly, his fear came true. The music world mourned his loss, but his influence never faded. 20. Ron Pigpen McKernan. Different from the rest of the Grateful Dead, Ron Pigpen McKernan brought deep, raw blues while the band explored wild psychedelic sounds. His rough voice and soulful energy made him the heart of the band's early years. Born in the mid-1940s in California, Pigpen was raised on blues and R&B. His father, a radio DJ, introduced him to legends like Muddy Waters and Lightnin' Hopkins. While his bandmates experimented with new sounds, Pigpen stuck to tradition, adding harmonica and powerful vocals. Songs like Turn On Your Love Light and Hard to Handle carried his signature style, reminding fans that the band's roots were in the blues. But the rock and roll lifestyle was hard on him. While others in the band used different substances, Pigpen relied on alcohol. It took a toll on his body. By the early 1970s, his health declined, and he struggled to keep up. In 1972, he had to leave the band for good. Dimebag Darrell. More than just a guitarist, Dimebag Darrell was a powerhouse. His playing was so fast and precise, it felt unreal. His fiery riffs shaped Pantera's sound and changed heavy metal forever. Born in the 1960s, Darrell Lance Abbott started playing guitar as a kid. He mixed blazing solos with heavy, crushing grooves. Along with his brother, drummer Vinnie Paul, he pushed Pantera to the top. Albums like Cowboys from Hell and Vulgar Display of Power became legendary. His unique squealing notes and lightning-fast picking set the bar for metal guitarists. But even great things fall apart. In the early 2000s, Pantera split up, so Darrell and Vinnie started a new band, Damage Plan. Their mission was clear: keep the music alive and move forward. But tragedy struck. On December 8, 2004, at a club in Ohio, a disturbed fan rushed the stage and started shooting. Dimebag was hit instantly, along with 3 others, before the gunman was stopped. It was a shocking act of brutality that stole one of metal's greatest talents. 25. Nick Drake. A quiet soul whose music carried deep sadness, Nick Drake never wanted fame, and it never came to him while he was alive. Born in England in the late 1940s, he was a thoughtful, private person who found comfort in music. Though he went to Cambridge, school was never his passion. Instead, he wrote songs, soft, poetic words about life, nature, and sadness. His first album, 5 Leaves Left, had gentle guitar sounds and a quiet voice, like a secret shared in the dark. Critics liked it, but few people heard it. Drake refused to tour or promote his work, which made it even harder for his music to reach people. His second album, Brighter Later, had a richer sound, with jazz influences and more instruments. But once again, the world didn't notice him. The weight of being ignored pushed him deeper into sadness. By the time he made Pink Moon in 1972, he had stripped everything away, just his voice and his guitar. He recorded it in 2 nights. The album was haunting and lonely, but almost no one listened. The world moved on, leaving him behind. He stopped making music, withdrew from people, and moved back in with his parents. Doctors gave him antidepressants, but medicine couldn't fix what hurt inside him. In November 1974, at just 26 years old, Nick Drake was found dead from an overdose. No one knows if it was an accident or on purpose, but either way, his voice was lost. For years, people forgot about him, and his albums sat on shelves, collecting dust. But time has a way of uncovering hidden treasures. Decades later, his music was rediscovered. His songs began appearing in movies, commercials, and on playlists.